Okay, now that Akulon is here, we can begin.
Okay.
Good morning, Emma. So, this morning's topic lecture, matter lecture, is on whaling. So we're going to no longer talk about basic income. Something a little different.
Basic income for whales.
Yeah,
They're
right.
people too, they deserve it.
Yeah, kind of. But when you go back home, if you have any questions about not just whaling, but debate in general, questions about the United States, you just want to be friends and chat, here's my email address. And I'm also on Facebook, if you're on Facebook. There's only 2 Joseph Zompettis in the world, so we're pretty easy to find.
I don't believe you.
You don't? Oh yeah, I'm serious.
Really?
Yeah,
How do you know?
because I know the family.
Even like in the whatever
In the
old-
motherland?
The mother that.
Yeah, yeah, seriously.
Really? Wow.
So, yeah, I'll give you a minute to write that down if you want. But yeah, today we're going to talk about whaling, the controversial issue of whaling. Does anybody know what whaling is? What whaling means? Yeah? I saw some heads go, yeah, what is whaling? You, young man, yeah. Speak loudly so everyone can hear you.
Okay. Catching of whale.
Catching of whales? Yeah, yeah, pretty much, yeah. But not just catching, it's also killing, right? I mean, because you could catch a whale and then drop it somewhere else or put it in an aquarium or something, right? Now, whaling is the purposeful killing of whales, okay? And whales, you see, are these big, huge, beautiful creatures, the largest mammal on the planet. And there are different types of whales. There's a variety of different types of whales. The sperm whale, the blue whale, the mink whale. Those are just 3, but there are many others. And so when we talk about whaling, we are generally talking about all whales, not just a particular type. Although some countries or some indigenous groups, when they go and try to find and kill whales, they only want a particular type. So in Japan, the mink whale is the most popular. And it might also be the most valuable. I'm not sure about that, but it might be the most valuable. But in any case, there are different types of whales, but when we talk about whaling, we're talking about all whales in general. Okay? So, what are we going to do today? We're going to talk a little bit about what is whaling. We're going to talk about the status quo of whaling. Does anybody remember what status quo means? What is status quo? You in the blue scarf. The current situation. Right, right. It's Latin. It means the state in which exists. The state which exists. I had 8 years of Latin, so I'm kind of a nerd about Latin words. But yeah, status means state. So we get the word state from status. So the current state of affairs, right? So the present system. What's currently happening, all right? So I'm going to talk to you about that. Most whaling motions, but not all, will be motions of policy. So it's important to know what the status quo is. But even if it's not a motion of policy, I think it's important to know what the current state of affairs is, right? You should know what's going on, because that could perhaps help you with your arguments that are based on values or even facts, right? So we're going to talk about that. And some of it's a little boring. Some of it's a little legal. So just bear with me. We'll get through it. But I think it's important that you know it. Then, instead of talking about government, opposition, et cetera, because motion could be just about anything that deals with whaling, right? So we don't really know what a specific motion might be. So I framed this in terms of what are the advantages or benefits of whaling, i.e. going out killing whales. Why would that be a good thing? And then what are some reasons why whaling might be bad? What are some of the problems with whaling? And then depending on how the motion is worded, you can use those arguments accordingly, right? You know, use them however they might fit. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about how you might prepare for some of these debates, which might be quite similar to what Shanna said yesterday, but we'll see. All right? Any questions about what we're going to be doing? All right. So, there's a lot of text on here, and so I apologize for that. It's like violating PowerPoint 101, right? Never have too much text in your slides. But I didn't know you when I prepared this, and so I didn't know what your level of English was. And so that's why there's more text on these slides than I generally would use, because you might need time to read through it, you might need time to translate certain words, so that's why there's all this text. So forgive me for that, but there was a reason behind my madness. So there are essentially two main components of whaling, as you can see here. Whaling for food and resources. So sometimes people go and they kill whales for food and for resources. And this is actually probably the most common reason why people whale. Yes, people do eat whale meat. In fact, when we had our welcome party 2 nights ago, do you remember the dean who spoke at first? He had a little speech, right, and he's welcoming us, right? Well, he told us later that evening that when he was a kid, he ate whale meat, and they served it in school. They don't do that anymore in Japan, but at least they're not supposed to. But yeah, back then when he was a kid, whale meat was very abundant. You could get it anywhere, so it was really cheap. And since it was really cheap, then schools, could afford to serve it. It was very cost beneficial for schools to serve it to the children. So he said that it tasted terrible. But I suppose some people might enjoy it. But in any case, it was a pretty inexpensive form of protein. And so that's why a lot of people would eat it. There's also a lot of resources that we can get from whales. In fact, how many of you have read Moby Dick by Melville? Anyone? Okay. Very famous book, very famous author. It's about whaling. And one of the reasons why back in the 19th century, the European American powers would engage in whaling was because of the oil that comes from the whale fat. You can take the blubber, the fat of the whale, and condense it, and you get oil from it. And so when they first started having lights, street lights, they burned. They weren't made. They didn't light up with electricity. They lit up with oil, and that made the whale oil extremely important. And whale oil was the predominant way they oiled lights in the home. Well, first of all in the streets, and then in the homes. And so it was really a crucial resource for Europeans and Americans. But they're not the only ones who would use whale oil, because those countries no longer whale. But there are other countries that still whale or try to get around some of the laws and whale, and they can still extract oil from the whale, and that's an important resource. Okay. And as you can also use some of the skin, I think, or maybe, I don't know, something inside the whale. You can also use as fertilizer. And then blubber. Blubber, it was used for clothing, insulation of houses even, because the blubber is very thick and it keeps the whales warm. So if it keeps a whale warm, it's probably going to keep you warm too, right? So lots of different things we can get from whales. In my PowerPoint slides, I have a list here, as you can see, of sources. And I listed these here because on the Moodle site, there's a bunch of articles. And you're not going to have time to read all these articles, I know that. But if one of these points that I will be talking about today, if that really interests you, or in your 30 minutes of preparation time for a debate, one of these arguments is something you want to make, you can easily look at the sources here, go to that particular article, and find evidence to support this claim. Okay? So if you want to, in your speech, make an argument about how people eat whale meat, you can go to Catalanac and Chen in 2005, and in that article they talk about that. Okay? You also don't need to take pictures of these slides unless you just want to, because this is also on the Moodle site, my PowerPoint presentation. All right? So you'll have that at your disposal. All right, the second reason that people whale is for scientific research. Scientific research. There is a commission, an international commission called the International Whaling Commission, the IWC, and it is related to the International Court. And the IWC has like an executive board. I don't know exactly what they're called, but they have members from different countries that sit on this board, and they establish policies that if there's a country that signs this particular whaling treaty, then they are under the jurisdiction of the IWC. All of the countries that we will be talking about are signatories to the treaty. So Japan, Norway, South Korea, Iceland, they're all signatories of this treaty, which means that whatever the IWC says, Japan, South Korea, Iceland, etc., should follow whatever their guidelines are. Many years ago, there was what we call a blanket ban. A blanket ban, which means a complete or absolute ban, no exceptions. So there was a complete blanket ban on whaling. But then I think sometime in, I don't know, 1986 maybe, Japan went to the IWC and asked for a special exception to the blanket ban. And they said, we know that whaling is bad, but maybe some whaling, a little bit of whaling, might be okay if we use it to study the whales. Study their mating patterns, study where they go, where they live, how they eat, and so forth. When they get sick, what happens? So study the lives of whales. Then we will learn more about whales. And if we learn more about whales, then we can protect more whales. So we'll kill a little, but save a lot in the long run, is essentially the argument. Okay? Kill a little, to save a lot. So the IWC decided that they would grant special permits for scientific whaling. And Japan, of course, applied for such permit and received it. Okay? And I'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, so any questions about what whaling is? All right. So let's talk about the status quo, that which exists, current state of affairs. So the treaty that I talked about is called the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling. And as I said, the IWC is the enforcer. It's the body that governs the signatories to this treaty. They say that whaling is essentially banned globally, as I said. But there are three types of whaling that currently exist. There's aboriginal subsistence whaling. In other words, there are small indigenous groups, I don't know which ones, but there are some that the IWC allows to whale because it's really their only resource for food, or at least protein. So we're talking about like indigenous groups that are really far north and don't have any other possibility of ingesting protein except for whales. So the IWC gives them a special pass. The second is there, for some reason, and I don't know the reason, but in Norway there's a single village that is given a permission to whale because of, it's really important to their business, I guess. It's a village where generations and generations and generations of fishermen only whaled. So it's like the only skill they have is to go out and whale. So if you take that away from them, they don't know how to do anything else. And apparently it's the only village in the world like this. So the IWC gives them a special exemption. And then the third type of whaling that happens, of course, is the scientific whaling. All right? So those three exceptions. We are obviously going to be talking mostly about the last one, the scientific research exemption, because that's where the most whaling occurs, right? The indigenous tribes, there's only a couple of them, they don't whale that much, right? You can kill one whale and feed a village for a month at least, right? So they're not doing a whole lot of whaling. So even though some whales are endangered, the whales that the indigenous groups are killing don't really threaten the overall whaling population. And the same thing is true with this small village in Norway. I mean, it's one village. So we're talking about, I don't know, maybe a dozen fishermen or something. So, and when they whale, they come back and that feeds the village. So we're not talking about a whole lot of whaling there either. But the scientific research exemption allows quite a bit of whaling as long as the stipulation, right, being, of course, that the government that's doing the whaling, i.e. in this case Japan, can prove that it's for scientific reasons. Does that make sense? So that one is really the one that does the most damage, the scientific research exemption. Okay, so there's also another treaty which you might read in the literature, which I don't think is necessarily that important for you to know, but the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species also protects, and I should have put right here, it protects some whales, not all whales. So this CITES treaty protects only those whales that are on the endangered species list. And not all whales are on the endangered species list, only a couple. So the CITES treaty only protects those few that are on the endangered species list. This International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling protects all whales. So that's the distinction between those two treaties. Okay? The CITES treaty, of course, also protects other endangered species, not just whales. So the white tiger in Asia is an endangered species. The bald eagle in the United States is an endangered species. So the CITES treaty would protect those as well. All right, so number 3. So there are 3 main countries interested in whaling, each of whom use this scientific research clause. All right? And those would be Iceland, Japan, and Norway. But South Korea has also expressed interest. I think that they've been caught once or twice whaling. Yeah?
It was just brought up once by some politician.
Okay, once.
Like, it was something that flashed in the news. Nobody's mentioned it for, like, what, 4 years, 5
Yeah,
years?
yeah.
But, just like Japan, Korea has a law where if fishermen accidentally, quote unquote, entangle a whale in their net while they're catching other fish, and they feel like, it's quote unquote impossible to save it, then they can just kill it and take it in as if it was some kind of fish.
Right.
Or if there's a whale that's beached on the shore, like in some countries, like just recently New Zealand, there were like, what, 200 whales or something?
Yeah, a lot.
And they tried to save them, and like trying to keep them wet until the tide could rise and they could escape, right? But in Korea, they don't do that. They just kill it and eat it. So like whale meat, traditionally, just like in Japan, like Koreans do eat whale meat. There's not any active like movement right now to try and make it like expanded, but there are always, I guess, something like between 5 and 10 whales every year that they do catch, and then they, sell the meat. Okay, that's it. That's
I appreciate that. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. There are other loopholes or ways of skirting the law.
Yeah.
And that's obviously one way as well. But yeah, the scientific, so because South Korea doesn't want to get caught, purposefully whaling, they've also expressed interest to the idea. I'm not sure if they've actually filed an official application for a permit,
No, never.
but they're considering trying to get a permit for
They
scientific.
did once consider, back in whatever, 2012. Somebody brought it up in the National Assembly. I remember reading the article, but it was never passed into any kind of like official initiative.
Official, right. Yeah. But, you know, it's something to consider, right? I mean, in the future, South Korea might.
Right.
So.
Japan does it, why not?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so since 2000, the IWC has allowed Japan to engage in scientific whaling in the northern Pacific for 3 specific types of whales. The sei whales, is that, I guess? Mink whales and the bride's whales and sperm whales. The bride's whales and sperm whales, I guess, are distinct species, but they're really closely related. So that's why they call it 3 instead of 4. So while I said that scientific whaling, you know, you could whale a lot more than the village in Norway and what's going on with some of the indigenous groups, there is a cap. So Japan, for scientific purposes, cannot hunt more than 1,535 whales. They're not supposed to go beyond that. All right. So it also permits Japan to sell whale meat. So after you do the scientific studies, you know, there's still a whale meat, right? So you might as well eat it, right? So the permit allows them to do that. And that they will allow that to occur with up to 440 mink whales. So Japan's not supposed to ingest more than 440 mink whales as a result of scientific whaling. But Japan arguably, allegedly, abuses this permit. Right? They go out and they hunt and kill whales. They don't do scientific research, but they still sell and eat the whale meat. And so people have been very concerned around the world that Japan is using the scientific research permit as a justification or an excuse to continue eating whale meat. In particular, there was a situation off the coast of Australia and New Zealand. Remember, Japan's only supposed to whale in the northern Pacific, right? But they were caught near Australia and New Zealand doing scientific whaling, right? And Australia objected. They said, whoa, wait a second. Even if we can't prove that you're not using the whales for scientific research, which we're pretty sure you're not, but even if we can't prove that, we can prove that you weren't in the northern Pacific, which violates your permit. And so Australia took Japan to court. The IWC and the International Court in 2014 ruled against Japan. They said, yeah, you're in violation. As a result, Australia has been pushing for a complete ban, back to the blanket ban, because their argument is, see, scientific research exemptions are abused. See, people still whale for non-scientific reasons, and that's bad. Of course, so far that hasn't happened yet. The scientific research exemption still exists, even though the court decision ruled against Japan. Now, there's been recently a lot of debate in the Japanese Diet, their Congress, and about whether or not they should follow the ruling of the court. The ruling of the court says that Japan has to have a moratorium. In other words, they have to stop doing scientific research whaling for a certain period of time, and then after that time they can go back to it. And of course, they can no longer go into the South Pacific. Right? They should only be in the North Pacific. Some people in the Diet say, well, yeah, we should just follow this, and then after the moratorium, go back to scientific whaling. But then there are people like Prime Minister Abe who say, no, we don't really care what the IWC says. We're going to do what we want to do because we're a sovereign country, and this is something that we should have the right to do. And so Abe has made statements recently indicating that Japan will not abide by the IWC ruling. So, as a result, Japan is also trying to recruit allies or trying to gather support with other countries, other members of the international community, so that they can block any future attempt by the IWC to go back to the blanket ban. Remember I said Australia is pushing for the blanket ban now that they caught Japan cheating? Well, Japan obviously doesn't want the blanket ban to come back. They want to keep the scientific research exemption because that allows them to skirt the law, right? So if Australia is successful at getting the IWC to consider a blanket ban again, Japan, in anticipation of that possibility, is using its official development assistance, its ODA, its development assistance, for countries around the world, and it's saying, we will give you development money if you support us in the IWC. And I don't know, I don't have any figures. The article may say this. I'll admit I did not read every word of every article. But I don't know which countries have agreed to this. So we call it quid pro quo, right? If I scratch your back, you scratch mine. We don't know, I don't know how many countries have actually agreed to this, but it's a pretty powerful incentive, I would think, right? Like if you're the Democratic Republic of the Congo and you're a signatory to the Whaling Convention, and Japan says, hey, DRC, you need some money for, I don't know, irrigation or schools. We will give you money that you desperately need, and all you have to do is just vote against the blanket ban. Just keep the status quo. And the DRC, not really being affected by whales, is going to say, yeah, sure, that's free money for us, right? So this is a pretty, I think, clever way of gathering international support. Yes?
You know, it says here, Wikipedia, which I know you don't trust, but it's a good starting point for me, and then, you know, if you don't trust, verify, right?
Uh-huh.
But it says, this is just one particular thing. A week before the IWC meeting, Japan hosted delegates from Angola, Cambodia, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Ghana, Laos, Malawi, Palau, Tanzania, and Vanuatu in Tokyo. And took them on a tour and fed them whale meat and so on. So that's a list of some of the countries anyway that Japan has been lobbying.
Yeah, but my point was we don't know which ones have actually agreed to it.
Yeah, we don't know which ones actually
was-
voted in favor or not.
But I knew that Congo was one of them that they were courting, which is why I used that as an
Yeah.
example. Yeah. But yeah, and most of those countries on that list are in Africa, right? So Japan is purposely targeting countries, some of the poorest countries in the world, right, who desperately need development money. And they also, of course, have to be signatories to the Whaling Treaty, and desperately targeting them, and chances are they'll probably accept, I'm guessing.
Right. Does Malawi even have like ocean access?
I don't know. Probably not.
I think
but-
they're like a landlocked country actually, but I guess it's an international commission, so
Yeah.
anyone can
That's right.
subscribe and join, right?
Yeah, as long as you sign the treaty, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the treaty also, I think, would prevent like Malawians from purchasing whale meat.
Yeah, probably.
So they, that would apply to them.
Mm.
But hey, good morning. There's a strawberry yummy filled thing on your desk. Right. So we know that Japan is abusing this. They can do up to, as I said, 1,535 whales per year, but no more than 440 minke whales. So some people might argue that that's relatively insignificant. When you think about how there are tens of thousands of whales on the planet, 1,500 a year is not that big of a deal. Because you also have to consider that whales are also reproducing during this time, right? So if there are, let's say there are 50,000 whales on the planet, and Japan whales 1,500, but those 50,000 whales also have 20,000 offspring, right? 1,500 per year is not really going to endanger the overall whaling population. So some people might argue that, all right, so what? So Japan abuses this every now and then. Every now and then, right? So what? Are we really talking about that many whales? Are we really talking about the overall population being harmed? Yes.
I have a question. Because last time when I researched about this, I believe that
absolutely. That's like with any kind of species argument, including plants. You can argue, and this is why Shanna is so bad for the planet, because she's a vegetarian. And, but yeah, the argument, what you're arguing is what we call biodiversity, right? And there's a food chain. Actually, it's more like a food web, not really just a chain. It's more like a food web. But you're absolutely right. I mean, some other fish depend on whales for the stability of their ecosystem. Some may feed on whales, like maybe sharks, but others may depend on whales to protect them even, right? Or there are some of those parasite fish, right, that attach themselves to the whales, and the whales help them survive. So there are lots of different ways that a particular species can be important for their particular ecosystem. And if you remove that species from the ecosystem, then the rest of the species are impacted. And if some of those are endangered, right, then you have a domino effect. So not only are you removing the whales, which might be endangered, but other species in that ecosystem might be endangered too. The ecosystem, most ecosystems are very fragile. And so if the species are removed, then that also affects the degree of, what is the fish exhale that's important for like photoplankton and stuff, and algae, and I don't know. Anyway, some fish are important for the nutrients of the water, right? And so things like algae and photoplankton and other things are also affected. Shannon's favorite food of seaweed would be affected. And so, yeah, that's definitely something we should consider. That even if it's a small amount of whales, it could have a very large impact on a particular ecosystem. Yeah, very good point. But some people will say, well, Japan only has one commercial whaling company. That's according to Alfred. But Harada says that there are two. And the fact that they're not in agreement should be fishy. Right? That should raise an alarm, right? That's suspicious. Okay? Two people who are experts on whaling, they don't really know if there's one or two, maybe there are five. Who really knows how many companies are in Japan doing this sort of thing? Because they obviously operate under the radar. Because if they didn't, if it was really well known, then Japan would definitely be in violation of the treaty. So we have this IWC, right? Its intent, of course, is to protect whales. But, as we've seen with the Australia v. Japan case, the IWC lacks enforcement measures. So just because the court says something doesn't mean that the country that's ruled against, in this case Japan, doesn't mean that they're going to abide by it. And there's really nothing the International Whaling Commission can do. So Japan and other countries will continue to whale without penalty. Really, the only penalty is what's known as international rebuke, or the international community really condemns the country. And Japan has faced a lot of that, right? When they were caught off the coast of Australia, the international community, including the United States, said, Japan, what do you think you're doing? You know, get your act together. And this hurts Japan in terms of foreign relations. So when Japan wants something done, let's say in the United Nations, like let's say Japan is against bombing in Syria, all right, and that's being discussed at the UN, and there's a resolution, and Japan's pushing for that. Well, if many countries are angry at Japan because they violated the whaling treaty, they may not side with Japan on an issue that Japan is pushing. So what we call that horse trading, or you could call it any kind of trading, and that's essentially what it is, right? Trading. So trading one favor for another. And in this case, Japan doesn't have much leverage. It can't say, hey, support us on Syria and we'll do something for you. Because they've already hurt their goodwill with other countries by breaking the treaty. So there is that ramification. But that's really about the only thing that the international community can do if a country is found violating the whaling treaty. So, any questions about the status quo? No? Yes?
Is it absolutely necessary to kill a whale for scientific purpose?
No.
But like, even if it's absolutely essential to kill a whale for scientific purposes, why 1,500? Is it not possible to obtain enough data from one of these specimens?
That's a good question. I really don't know the answer to that. Yeah. And certainly, 1,500 every year seems like quite a bit, right? If it was 1,500 in a 5-year time frame, that would be one thing. But yeah, every year, yeah, it does seem quite a bit for just scientific research.
Point of information. Again, this is a Wikipedia statistic, so you may want to double check. But it's not just Wikipedia because over the years, like I read the newspaper almost every day, and so I've read articles over the past years, and my sort of general memory confirms this.
All right, so we got two sources. We've got
Yeah.
Peter and we've
Peter's
got
memory
Wikipedia.
and Wikipedia.
Oh, actually, it's even worse than that. It's Peter's memory.
Anyway, but I don't even remember the exact number in Wikipedia, although I can look back up. But like the most recent year that I read, they actually only killed about 400 for the research purpose. But then about 200, so-called accidentally, because they happened to get caught in fishermen's nets, or so they say, right? Plus another few from these little local communities that do it.
And some of them that are
10 or-
beached and
Yeah, something like that, right? So even though the quota that they're officially assigned, says they could kill up to 1,500, they don't actually kill that. Just to give you a sense of scale. I mean, I think given what Tommy said about how even a few of them may make a difference, I think the difference between 1,500 and 400 is probably significant. Again, this is just from what I remember.
well, no,
from
I
my
mean that
memory.
makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But from my memory, it's some years it's actually less. It's only 300 or 350, but it seems to range between about 300 and 400 from my general perception. Norway, on the other hand, they actually have some kind of commercial exemption that they wrote into the treaty when they joined. So they actually have what's officially a commercial whaling program. And from that, again, it's a general sense. They kill about 1,000. Plus they have some extra ones they kill for research, so they may kill up to 1,200 or something. I don't know exact numbers though. In Parley, you never know exact numbers because you don't have all your evidence there.
Well, and the other distinction though is that the whales that Norway tend to kill are not endangered, whereas
Right.
the
Well,
ones in
neither are
North
the ones
Pacific-
Japan kills. They're
Yeah,
mostly,
I think the
oh.
mink whales.
Yeah, mostly mink, which aren't endangered.
They're not.
Yeah, they're not on the endangered list. But they also
They may not be on they may not be on the list, but they are close. I mean, their population is rapidly declining.
I believe they also kill a lot of sei whales or something.
Their
Yeah.
target is 50 sei whales a year. I don't know any number of how many they actually kill, and they argue this is also Japan argues that although the sei whale continues to be listed as endangered, the species has swelled in number from 9,000 in 1978 to 28,000 in 2002. So its catch of 50 sei whales per year is safe, and classification as endangered species should be reconsidered. But then that's in violation of the CITES or whatever it's CITES treaty, right? The Convention on something in trade in endangered species,
But
right?
how exactly?
Yeah, international trade in endangered.
How do they exactly count those numbers? I was just wondering.
I think the whale's pretty easy to count. It's really big and it
Yeah,
takes
but
a while to catch
but
it
it's
and
also-
process it.
But it's also easy to fudge the numbers, right? Because it's not like there are monitoring stations in countries
Well,
that.
Sea Shepherd monitors them pretty closely, actually, right? You see in the news, every time Japan sends a whaling ship out there, there are all these boats chasing it, and sometimes the activists even throw bottles of rotten butter or something at the ship or something. Yeah.
Of course, there are cases when that happens, but that's not every case.
Not every case, really?
No.
I thought they always they have two full-time ships dedicated to just
They
following the Japanese.
No, they
whaling?
didn't know they were going off the coast of Australia,
Oh,
for
really?
example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that for sure.
So if they are saying that it's for scientific research, did they ever present in front of media we did this or that for scientific, we found this or that?
Oh yeah, I think to file a report
Yeah.
to the IWC every year about
Right.
some of their research findings. But, you know, let's say they whale 400, okay, and they actually do scientific research on 5.
Right.
The
Exactly.
information they get on the 5 gets into the report, right? But
Right.
the others, we
Yeah,
don't know.
that's like the Australian argument. I think you have some more stuff on that in your later slides, actually.
Yeah, I think so.
And if not, like, check Wikipedia, or one of Joe's more reliable sources. Although I don't know about the Scotsman, like, how reliable is that?
Well, that was just a reporting of the incident.
Exactly.
So that was just a factual report.
Like, that's where Wikipedia gets most of its sources too, right?
Yeah, but time and time again, Wikipedia has been noted to have faulty information, inaccuracies, exaggerations. And some of the sites that they have listed underneath at the bottom, which some could be useful, like you go to Wikipedia, you see who they're quoting, and you go to that source. But many of those sources aren't very good either. So that's why, at least in the United States, we try to impose a higher standard of research. Wikipedia is really easy, obviously. And if you're just brainstorming, trying to think, okay, well, what's going on with whaling? Well, Wikipedia is helpful for that, right? But if you're trying to find facts, I wouldn't trust it. And particularly in this day and age of fake news that's really proliferating, I think Wikipedia is even less trustworthy because some of the citations that they use that you click on at the bottom could be fake news. In fact, I'll just point this out real fast. There are 2 examples that I caught, and I'm writing a book right now, and it's on the political rhetoric and stuff. So every day I was researching the election with Trump and Hillary, and one site said, you know, Trump made a big deal about guns and the Second Amendment in the United States, that people should have the right to have guns. And there was a website that, a very conservative website, pointed or reported, based upon another website, that Obama had just signed an executive order banning all military assault rifles. And so therefore, we should be really scared that Obama's going to take all of our guns away, and this is why we need Donald Trump. So I researched the original site that the conservative website was citing, and it looks completely legitimate. The URL address was abcnews.com / blah, 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 blah. It comes up on the computer, it looks professional, it looks like ABC News, they've got a little video clip of a correspondent and everything else. The first couple paragraphs talk about how Obama signed this executive order, getting rid of all, you know, assault rifles and so forth. And that's because most people don't read beyond the first couple paragraphs, right? Most people don't read beyond the headline.
Wait, there's stuff under a headline?
Yeah. But if you read the 3rd paragraph, it starts talking about how dolphins masturbate. And then the paragraph after that is just gibberish.
Actually, probably dolphins do masturbate, though, don't they?
Well, I don't
In
know.
their
It has
mammals.
nothing to do with the
That really did not even cross my mind, to be honest with you. All I knew was that dolphins masturbating had nothing to do with Obama's executive order on assault weapons. And so if you go to Snopes.com, you might want to write this down, Snopes.com. Snopes.com actually researches a lot of these kinds of things. And it researches so-called fake news. And so you could go to Snopes.com, type in a keyword like assault rifles or something like that, and it will pull up, oh yeah, there are these websites that are completely fabricated and they're reporting on this stuff, and then you know what's accurate versus what's not. Okay? So if you use Wikipedia, which I really hope you don't, if you do, and there's some evidence or some facts that you think are pretty important, double check them. Okay? Double check them.
Could I add one more comment? I think that even applies to academic papers, though. Like, certainly academic papers have a much higher standard. They're reviewed by other professors who should know what they're talking about, but a lot of stuff slips through that's just crazy. A friend of mine just published a paper in Korean about plant rights.
Yeah.
right? You know, you say animal rights, well, what about plant rights? You know, plants, like, they respond to stimuli, right? If the sun's going one direction, they follow it, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, there's some, I don't think it's a real policy debate, but a philosophical debate in the academic community. To what extent should we acknowledge plants as, like, having some kind of individual existence and therefore rights, right?
Well, I don't know
But-
why that would be fake. But
No, that's not the fake part. But then, you know, this is a Korean writer writing, so like they're, you know, like just things that they're very minor things, but they slip in, like everywhere. Like the one Joe's talking about is like somebody intentionally putting up fake news and then just like cutting and pasting totally irrelevant stuff to make it look long and impressive, right? Essentially, I think
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
saying. But this one, he says like, so we have evidence that plant news or plant rights is gaining greater legitimacy because a paper was recently cited for the Ig Nobel Prize. You know what that is, right?
Mhm.
So, you know what, anybody know what the Ig Nobel Prize is? Like, you know what the Nobel Prize is, right? Do you know what the English word ignoble means? What does it mean?
So the like empathy, empathy.
No, not interesting. Ignoble, it's like a joke, right? It's a play on the word Nobel Prize.
Right,
but
like
instead
ignorant means lack of knowledge.
Right, like ignorant is lack of knowledge. Ignoble means lack of nobility. It's the opposite. It's like stupid, foolish, ridiculous. So this is like the ridiculous prize. Every year, this group of people, just for fun, they list like scientific papers that are so stupid, nobody should have ever wasted their time on them. But this guy is citing, you know, oh, this is evidence that it's very legitimate. So, you know, okay, so it's just one line in his paper. The other things he says are somewhat reasonable, but, you know, like there's stupid facts or fake facts or wrong facts or misunderstandings everywhere. So,
Exaggeration.
you know, always be smarter than what you read, or at least try to be, like,
Right,
question.
no, that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, but if you want to be smarter than what you read, then you probably shouldn't be reading Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Just, but no, yeah.
Anyway.
Oh, yeah. So Peter and I could probably actually have a debate about this, and it might even be fun.
We
But
should.
the point, though,
Give
is
us a solution.
always, here's another thing, right? Here's another thing. Let's say someone comes to you and they're trying to convince you to go to their university. And they say, you know, you really should transfer to my university. And you say, well, why? And they say, well, because it's cheaper. But in your mind, you might say, well, but the quality of my education is better where I'm going now, and I can't afford it, so why would I transfer to your university? You're not going to be persuaded by that one simple argument, are you? But what if they came back and they said, my university is cheaper by a lot, and we'll give you a stipend for your books, and we're hiring a bunch of new professors, so the quality of our classes are going up, and we're going to have smaller class sizes than what you currently have now, and we've got a professional networking system so that when you graduate, you'll get a job. Now all of a sudden, it's looking more appealing, isn't it? So this is why, and this is a problem in all debate, not just party debate. It's also a problem in policy debate. So too often, debaters will answer an argument with only one argument, right? But if you have multiple arguments or multiple sources of evidence, then the stronger your argument will be. And this is what we're talking about here, right? It's fine that Peter looked at Wikipedia, right? And he's getting a general idea of what's going on. It may cite some important sources at the end of the Wikipedia entry. But he shouldn't just rely on Wikipedia. He should go to those sites that are listed at the bottom and check them out. Okay? Double check your facts. And if you find another article, so you have 3 sources, that's even better. Okay? But if you just rely on one, like if you just went to the ABC News website thinking that that's legit and say, Obama did this executive order, then not only is that not persuasive because you only have one piece of evidence, but you also would just be wrong. Right? So I know it's a lot, right? You know, researching for most people is not fun. Reading a lot of current events and politics stuff, economics, those kinds of things is not fun for a lot of students. But not only will you learn a lot, and not only will you be a better citizen because you know what's going on in your community and your country and the world, but when you go into debates, you're going to be much more likely to be successful. So try to increase your repertoire of knowledge. All right? And double check things. Shannon, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah. Real quick on you want to answer things with more than one argument. I always think of it this way. If you're in a room and it burns down, how many options do you want to be able to get out of it? As many as possible, right? You don't want just one door and you're going to cross your fingers and hope that that one door is the one that doesn't catch on fire, right? So you want to make as many arguments as you can to ensure that you can defeat your opponent in a bunch of different ways.
I like that analogy. That's good. All right, let's get on to benefits of whaling. This first line here is not a benefit per se, but it can help when you're arguing about the benefits of whaling. So according to Alford, who's written a lot about, I think he's just a journalist, but he's written a ton about whaling, so he's definitely studied it. But in any case, in 2010 anyway, which is a little old, but in 2010, the majority of Japanese supported whaling. Okay, so like let's say you're arguing in support of Abe not following the IWC's court ruling, and you say, well, then the rest of the Japanese would also support Abe. Okay, so that can help you with some of these arguments, perhaps. But I think this is a really important argument. Whaling is an important component to nationalism and Japanese efforts and Japanese rhetoric. So this also includes a resistance to the anti-whaling discourse, which characterizes Japan as barbaric and uncivilized. And the Block article talks about how other countries around the world who are against whaling use words like Japan is barbaric, Japan is uncivilized, which is inflammatory rhetoric, right? That's inflammatory discourse. They don't need to call Japan names. They could just say, hey, whaling is bad and Japan's doing it. They don't need to call Japan barbarous or uncivilized. And so it's important then, if Japan can find strength in its history and its cultural traditions, it helps to kind of offset some of those counter-arguments about how it might be uncivilized. The next is Japan frames its right to whale. Remember framing, rhetorical framing. So Japan is saying that its ability to whale is in the context of an anti-imperial, anti-Western hegemony against the East. I really like this argument too, right? Because it's usually like the United States and Germany, maybe France, you know, who are ganging up on poor little Japan, saying, we're better than you, you know, you're being uncivilized, killing all these whales. But Japan is saying, hey, we're like the David to Goliath. And the big hegemony, those countries in positions of power are picking on us. And so they try to frame their right to kind of say, well, if we're allowed to whale, then that's a small victory against these powerful countries, right? So I think that's kind of cool. They also argue that the U.S. pressure against the Japanese whaling is hypocritical, since the U.S. allows for whaling of much more endangered whales off the coast of Alaska, according to Goodman in 2000. And I don't think that there's ever been a court case, but the United States is in direct violation of the treaty as well, but no one has ever taken them to court, probably because they're scared, right? They don't want the United States to backlash or respond in some other area, you know, that might damage them. So most people just remain hush, but yeah, even the United States engages in whaling too, and so that makes at least American concerns about Japanese whaling hypocritical. And not just Japanese whaling, but right, South Korea, Norway, etc. The anti-whaling arguments about animal rights, you know, Peter was just talking about plant rights. Well, a lot of people also say that animals have rights. They're sentient beings, in other words, they think. Some of them have pretty sophisticated communication skills, like dolphins. Whales do too. Whales can communicate with each other. We don't know exactly what it is that they say, but we know that they're communicating with those high-pitched well, we call them whales, but spelled differently. Those high-pitched noises, that kind of thing. Those are meaningful messages. So that means that they're intelligent. And if animals are intelligent, maybe they're not as intelligent as us, but neither is a 6-month-old baby, right? But we wouldn't allow Japan to kill a bunch of 6-month-old babies for scientific research, would we? So why would we do that for whales? So that's the argument that the opposition might make here. But to answer those animal rights arguments, Japan and others will say that these rights arguments are exaggerated or unsound. There's no scientific evidence that proves that whales are a unique species. Most animal rights arguments blur the distinction between the over 80 different types of whale species. So, yeah, they might be sentient, they might have intelligence, but it's really not to the level that we should really care about it. Particularly if we're doing scientific research to save more in the future, right? That would be the other answer, I think. All right, so another benefit argument. Japan and others have argued that the reasons behind the ban lack any scientific basis, which is why they continue to press for this scientific exemption. So then Japan claims that they hunt whales for scientific reasons that supposedly aids in the knowledge of the impacts of whaling. But in reality, through the scientific research that they do of the 5 out of 400, is they hope to make arguments for why whales really aren't endangered. So this is one of the reasons why the scientific exemption may not be good, because if whales are endangered, but Japan can find some evidence through their scientific research that they're not really that endangered, then that might mean that Japan and other countries in the future could do even more whaling, right? Because if they're not endangered, then let them do even more whaling. And that, of course, is Japan's hope. So that's kind of a tricky argument there. Another thing, during the conference, the IWC meets once a year. They might meet more than that under special conditions, but they have at least one scheduled meeting a year. Japanese delegates have been spray painted, they've been spat upon, and their ocean vessels have been attacked by environmental groups. Okay? All because they are supporting scientific whaling. So Japan obviously thinks that this is ridiculous, it's outrageous, and if people would warm up to the fact that scientific whaling is not so bad, then these kinds of things wouldn't happen. The other argument is a culture argument, which I think is a pretty important argument, that many villages have been doing whaling for generations, for centuries. And so it's really important to their culture. I mean, the entire village has developed around the actual activity of whaling. So coastal whaling has a really important impact on their culture. But it may not have that much impact on the overall species of whales. So therefore, we should allow whaling. We are, after all, talking about small villages. So it's not like they're going to be going out here killing hundreds and hundreds of whales. So if it's really important to their culture and their history and what they find significant and gives meaning to their lives, then that's more important than just killing a couple hundred whales. Unless Tommy wins his biodiversity argument. And then I've already mentioned this, but Japan also argues that its scientific research is important to understanding how we can conserve and sustain whale populations. So we will save more whales in the long term. Japan also claims that their scientific research is transparent, open to the public, shared with other nations. But again, we already mentioned this because Tommy had that question, and so yeah, they can fudge those numbers. Japan says that there's a difference between coastal subsistence whaling versus large-scale industrial whaling. They think that Japan may argue that small-scale subsistence whaling, in other words, whaling that's crucial for the lives and the livelihood of these villages, is a lot different than large industrial vessels going out and whaling lots and lots and lots of whales, right? Because small-scale subsistence whaling, again, is only a small part of the overall whaling population, or the whale population. So it wouldn't have a huge impact, unlike large-scale industrial whaling. And Japan argues that no real significant depletion of whales exists. They argue why scientific whaling is justified, and they say that the scientific rationale also suggests that they are not intelligent, because apparently the data they've collected from the whaling suggests that, oh, they're really not all that smart, which again answers those animal rights arguments. Some environmental groups have a lot of lobbying power, which pressure Western governments like the United States. This means that anti-whaling efforts may be unfairly slanted in one direction. This argument is different than the hegemony argument that I talked about before, but they are related, right? So these anti-whaling groups pressure the powerful Western countries to then be unfair to Japan. And so I think you can make those two arguments together and your argument would be stronger. A universal blanket ban does not differentiate between the different species, whereas a scientific research exemption does. And here's something for Koreans. Whaling is an important cultural tradition in South Korea as well as Japan. So if you're going to make culture arguments, you'd want to check out this Scotsman article and the Block and Gardiner articles. And they, in a related way, the concepts of animal rights doesn't really have a cultural equivalent in Japan. I don't know what that's like in South Korea, but a lot of Western nations, like in the United States, they tend to argue that species have rights. But in many Eastern countries, that doesn't really translate very well, and they don't have a similar concept. So their culture ultimately is more important. All right, now let's shift gears. Let's talk about the other side. What are some of the problems of whaling? We've mentioned some of these already, but let's just go through the list so that we're thorough. So whales have rights. Obviously, killing the whales violates those rights. If you're interested in the animal rights debate, see this Block article and the Briggs and Simons article. Additionally, pro-whaling people in Japan, Iceland, Norway hold considerable influence and lobbying power with those domestic governments. Like, for example, Abe, right, is very pro-whaling. So as a result, one could argue that their influence skews the actual acceptance and support that whaling has in these countries. So just because you have evidence from 2010 that the majority of Japanese are in favor of whaling, that may not be accurate. Because if the government of Japan is pro-whaling, then many of its citizens may just go along with it and not be very critical of the government's stance. You know, and this is why I wore this shirt today. Because debaters, as well as all citizens, should demand evidence and think critically. Right? And a lot of times we don't do that, and we just follow whatever they say, which is one of the problems we're having in the United States right now with Donald Trump. Okay? He says something, and then a large group of the population in the United States just agree or follow him without thinking it through. And that's problematic. Right, and then the next argument, we've already mentioned this, Japan's scientific rationale is only an excuse for them to hunt more whales. They abuse it. And then Japan's scientific studies are not transparent, right? They can fudge the numbers. There really are no economic benefits to Japanese whaling. It's a dying industry, and virtually no one eats whale meat anymore, according to these two Hinckley articles. And whaling, of course, reduces the population of whales. Whale watching, which obviously requires a sizable population of whales, is lucrative tourism and can yield up to $2 billion annually. So there's a trade-off, right? If someone says that whaling has economic benefits, the other side of the debate could say, oh, well, wait a second. It's actually more economically lucrative to keep these whales alive for things like tourism. One argument I did not have listed in the problems of whaling, which I should have, but I knew it would come up, is Tommy's argument of biodiversity. Right? Obviously, if you reduce the population of whales, that can have serious impact on ecosystems. Now, when we prepare for debates, whatever the motion is, you kind of want to ask these general questions. Okay, so what constitutes the international ban on whaling? If this, for example, if this is the motion, this House would lift the international ban on whaling. Well, what does that mean? What is the international ban? Does it include scientific research? What countries are affected by the ban, or who would benefit from lifting it? What are the reasons for lifting the ban, or what benefits would lifting it bring? What are the reasons for keeping the ban? And if we do support keeping the ban, does that mean we should also support the scientific research exemptions? And then if you think about all the arguments that I just went through, the benefits as well as the problems of whaling, depending on how you answer these questions, which depends on what the motion is, then those arguments you can then use those arguments accordingly. Just kind of plug them into the right place. But remember yesterday when we did the drill, actually Peter did the discussion of what's the motion. You begin with what is your vision statement, then you define the terms, then you think of the plan, then you think about the benefits of the plan. Well, that's the exact same thing you would do here, but I would encourage you to ask some of these questions before that very first step. Ask some of these questions, depending on what the motion is, to help you frame that vision statement, that hinge statement. Okay? Because you need to think about, well, what is the core issue that's going on in this motion? And that then will determine what kind of conception of reality you want to frame. Okay? Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about any of this? All right, the rest of my slides, which again are on the Moodle, are, I think, repetitions of things that you learned yesterday. So, what do you do when you prepare your case for the government or the opposition? We had an entire session on that yesterday, a whole drill. And then, what are some of the specific case questions that you might ask? So if the motion is this, these are some specific questions you might ask to help you frame your arguments in a more particular, specified way. And then you might think about this kind of model to help you frame your arguments, which is essentially what I just said. Okay, vision statement, definition. Vision statement would be here, the goal or stance. Your definition in the arguments. And then this is how the process would work, right? Government, op, and so on. And then here are all the references that I used in this PowerPoint presentation. Okay? And you have those articles as well on the Moodle.